It's 10 p.m. on May 16th, 2012, and Havelock Town pulses with the electric hum of Colombo's nightlife. A cold breeze from the Indian Ocean fans across Sri Lanka's capital city. Inside Greco nightclub, the bass can be heard thumping, strobe lights slicing through haze, remix Bela tunes playing aloud. And in this, Wasim Thajudeen, 27 and built like the rugby captain that he is, broad shoulders and an easy smile, holds court at a corner booth. This isn't just any night. It's the birthday bash for his close mate, Sajid Pereira, a fellow Havelock green jersey alum who's turning 28. The clock ticks 11:30 p.m. Gotta bounce, lads, he says, clapping Sajid on the back with a bear hug. Happy birthday, Captain. Don't let those fools bankrupt you. Hugs ripple through the crew, and a chorus of drive safe and text when your wheels down fades as he weaves out in his black BMW X5. He dials his friend, his travel confidant, and occasional sparring partner, saying, heading home, catch you stateside. Nothing about that night appears unusual. There are no warnings, no raised alarms, nothing that suggests it will end any differently from countless other nights in Colombo. But something happens that night. Wasim never makes it to the airport the next morning. He never boards his flight, and he never leaves the city. This is the story of Sri Lanka's golden boy, a national rugby star. This is the story of Wasim Thajudeen. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest stories from around South Asia. I'm your host Aryan.
And I'm Aishwarya.
And the case that we have for you today takes us all the way to the South Asian country and island of Sri Lanka, and a mystery that still baffles that nation.
Aryan, a case from Sri Lanka, I feel like it's been a really long time since we've had one of those. I know we had Yvonne Johnson, but that was, I think, our third or fourth episode, really early days. We've also had one of our really infamous domestic violence cases from there. But yeah, it's so good
It's been a while. I was deliberately looking for, because I try to, we try to create a balance of the South Asian countries we cover, and it's not just India that has stories that deserve to be told.
Correct.
Sri Lanka does too, and we have so many listeners there. And when I started researching the story, it just reminded me of so many of the conspiratorial mystery cases that, to me, this is the Sushant Singh Rajput case of Sri Lanka.
Oh, no way.
So I thought I'll pick it, and I hope it's a case that we are able to shed some light on.
So are you bringing an unsolved mystery to our audience for once? That's what it sounds like.
It is not unsolved the way yours are unsolved and uncomfortable without any ending.
Sure.
Mine are less unsolved, but a little unsolved.
But intriguing
enough,
nonetheless.
and with enough conflict resolution for my attachment folks
who really need it.
Who need it, yeah.
Makes sense. Before we get into the case though, attachment folks who are deeply attached to us, go subscribe, go find our Patreon link if you want to help keep the wheels at Desi Crime running.
Yeah, Aishwarya has been doing
Go buy a
some
book.
banger extra exclusive episodes on Patreon. So you guys should really check it out.
Some really funny bloopers where Aryan's making a fool out of himself. So am I. But go check it out.
Wasim grew up in a Muslim family in Colombo, Sri Lanka, a bustling port city in South Asia known for its mix of colonial architecture, beaches, and diverse communities. Born on June 13, 1984, to parents Mohammed Thajudeen, a businessman, and Fatima, a homemaker, he shared a modest home on Park Road with three siblings, two older brothers, Mohammed Fazlan and Mohammed Shafraz, and an older sister, Aisha. The family maintained a low profile, focusing on education and community ties in a working-class neighborhood. Early childhood involves local schools and a disciplined life that carried into sports. At age 7, Wasim enrolled at the St. Thomas Preparatory School in Mount Lavinia, a coastal suburb around 10 kilometers south of central Colombo, famous for its golden beaches and the historic Mount Lavinia Hotel. The school, an Anglican boys' institution founded in 1953, emphasized academics and extracurriculars. And here, he starts rugby, a contact sport popular in Sri Lanka since the British colonial times. In 2001, Wasim advanced to the St. Thomas College in Mount Lavinia, which is the main campus of the same Anglican network, established in 1851 and known for producing leaders in business and, in his case, sports. He joins the school's top rugby squad, playing inter-school matches against rivals like Royal College. By 2003, at age 19, he became the vice captain, leading plays in key games like the Royal Thomaian fixture, which is like the derby match that everybody comes to watch, and around 1,000 people flock to it. That year, national selectors add him to the under-19 schools team for tournaments across Sri Lanka. Then graduation follows, with rugby as a core routine. After 2003, while still training professional rugby, Wasim now entered the workforce at Macwood's American Express Travel, an all-in travel agency that specialized in tours, visa services, and Amex-related bookings, such as handling the flights, hotels, and safaris for locals and tourists. In 2005, he joined the Havelock Sports Club, a multi-sport hub at the T.H. Pitala Pavilion grounds, nicknamed Havies for its green jersey and legacy of 20-plus league titles since the 1920s. Rugby remained central, and by 2009, he captained this club and its team, competing in the Clifford Cup leagues and the 2008 Hong Kong Sevens internationally. Now, the Hong Kong Sevens are a big deal where he was representing Sri Lanka, and it's a very prestigious rugby cup. A 2009 knee injury halted his play, but he eyed a 2012 return while shifting careers to citrus vacations in 2011. Now, that's the backstory of who he was as a guy, his profession, his rugby career, and the fame that he had built for himself. But we have to come back to the night that sealed the fate of this rugby player, the early hours of May 17th, 2012. They unfold without drama on paper. At approximately 1:15 am, a night watchman stationed near the Shalika grounds on Park Road in Narayanpeta is startled awake by a sudden brightness cutting through the dark. A vehicle is engulfed in flames, fire climbing violently against the boundary wall. The watchman moves closer, instinctively at first, and then hesitates as the heat becomes unbearable. The fire is already too advanced to approach safely. Realizing this is beyond his control, he dials 119 in a state of panic and reports a vehicle fire. Emergency response does not arrive immediately, let alone immediately. The call is logged, passed through routine channels, and queued alongside other overnight incidents. Firefighters and police reach the scene closer to 4 am, almost 3 hours after the incident, by which point the blaze has exhausted itself. This is a ridiculous emergency response time. A friend of mine served in the Red Cross, has been a firefighter in Austria, and he often tells me how important, especially for firefighters, almost more than police and ambulances, it is for firefighters to respond, because their response time of a minute is a matter of 10-15 lives saved or not saved, right? As opposed to one ambulance that may or may not save that one person if it arrives on time. So it's 15 times more if you're to sort of quantify.
And fires spread like crazy.
Spread like
and
wildfire.
I think we don't know this enough, that we in South Asia, a lot of us countries were not up to speed with fire code in terms of the way our cities are built. So a lot of our areas, if one thing catches fire, maybe our newer apartment complexes are, but most parts of our older cities, one structure catches fire and it will take everything down with it.
Everything down. I mean, we've covered the Upar cinema tragedy.
Correct.
But 3 hours later is like unheard of, in my opinion, and this detail is something you need to keep in mind as we go forward, because to me it was just ridiculous when I was researching.
Right.
By the time they reach, what remains is a skeletal shell of a black BMW X5. Its interior's gutted, paint blistered, tires collapsed, and metal warped. Inside the vehicle, slumped into the passenger seat rather than behind the steering wheel, is a human body burned beyond recognition. There are no visible facial features left to identify. There is no clothing pattern that immediately gives away who it might be. Identification comes instead from the vehicle's registration number, still readable despite the fire damage. The registration traces back to a certain Wasim Thajudeen. the name begins circulating quietly among the first responders. Wasim Thajudeen, national rugby player, Havelock Sports Club, 27 years old, a former Sri Lanka Sevens player. Someone whose face is known, whose name has appeared in sports pages, not crime blotters. The realization registers, but it does not change the procedure on the ground. The scene is not transformed into a high security site. There is no urgency to escalate beyond the local police unit. No senior forensic team is summoned immediately. From the very beginning, the working assumption is already forming. This looks like a road accident involving a high-end vehicle and fire. The Narayan Pita Police OIC Damian Fernando arrives at the scene shortly after dawn. He walks around the wreckage, noting the burn pattern, the final resting position of the vehicle, and the surrounding area. The smell of fuel still hangs faintly in the air, but this is not treated as unusual. Fuel leaks are common in crashes. There is no extended police cordon drawn, no yellow tape sealing off Park Road for hours. Traffic is diverted briefly, but then allowed to resume. Nearby houses and buildings are not canvassed systematically, no door-to-door questioning is conducted, no public appeal for witnesses is issued. From the police point of view, nothing at this stage demands extraordinary measures. Within a matter of hours, the framework of the case is established. The incident is recorded as a traffic accident. The preliminary police log states that the driver lost control of the vehicle while travelling at speed, allegedly on his way to the airport. Alcohol consumption is mentioned as a possibility. Keep in mind, this detail does not come from a breathalyzer test or eyewitness testimony.
Aran, okay, fine. They've called it an accident. They haven't probed anything else. But the fact that they've called it an accident, are there at least signs that this was an accident? Is the car sort of rammed into something? Because we've seen fires of cars just stranded on the side of the road as well, which happen for completely different reasons as compared to an accident where you've collided into a wall or another car or a truck. So did it look like an accident on those fronts, or was it just a car on the side of the road?
This could have very well be understood if a proper forensic analysis of the wreckage was done, but the assumptions were being made prior to any analysis. And later, as we will find, there was signs of accident found, except not in the front of the car, but at the back of the car.
Oh my God.
Yeah, which paints a different story altogether. If you remember the Shafilia Ahmed case in Canada, that too had a car, it's an honor killing case we covered, and everybody thought that the car just drove off into the sea and was drowned, but when they recovered the car, there was damage at the back, which means something rammed in. Now, all of these things are worth analyzing, except assumptions were being made prior to the analysis. Now, by this point in my research, I was the skin-crawling kinda annoyed. The systemic lapses occurring at this point of the critical hours of an investigation to me only meant it's not going to get any better. And it did not, because you're losing your best chance of clawing away at the story. I don't think a VIP death should be treated differently from a layperson, but at the very least needs to be treated at par with strict basic protocol. The file that was created on him does not include documented skid marks. There is no formal accident reconstruction. There is no analysis of impact angles or vehicle dynamics. These omissions are not seen as negligence at the time. They are consistent with how hundreds of similar cases are processed every year. From the police perspective, the case appears straightforward. A young man driving late at night, possibly tired, possibly speeding, possibly under the influence, loses control of his vehicle and crashes. The fire explains the extent of the damage. The death is tragic, but not suspicious. The paperwork moves quickly. Statements are brief. Reports are short. The incident is classified and effectively closed within the same day. There is no sense within the police system in May of 2012 that this death of this rugby player will return to haunt all of them. It is only later, outside the official machinery, that discomfort begins to surface. By around 7 a.m. of the same day, word reaches Wasim Thajudeen's friends and teammates. Many of them are from the Havelock Sports Club, men who trained with him, travelled with him, shared locker rooms and long bus rides. They begin arriving near Shalika grounds in small groups, speaking quietly, trying to reconcile what they are hearing with what they know. What immediately strikes them? It's not the fire or the wreckage or the finality of death. It is the explanation. Alcohol, speeding, loss of control. These words do not fit the person they knew. Wasim Thajudeen did not drink. This is not a claim born of grief or denial, one saying, oh my god, my son didn't drink, my friend didn't drink. No, it is a widely acknowledged fact among his teammates. Even during post-match celebrations, even after major wins, even at birthday parties, he drank soda. This detail might seem small, even trivial, to investigators accustomed to dealing with statistics and probabilities. But to those who knew him, it mattered deeply. It is the first inconsistency that refuses to sit quietly. As they look at the remains of the vehicle, other questions emerge. The damage to the BMW, like Aishwarya pointed out, does not resemble the aftermath of a high-speed frontal collision. The rear appears impacted. The front is not completely obliterated. The wall shows signs of contact, but not the kind associated with the vehicle traveling at extreme speed. More confusing still is the location of the body. Wasim is found in the passenger seat. No one can immediately explain why a man driving alone would end up there. The doors of the vehicle are partially open, not crushed shut, not sealed by impact. To the police, these are peripheral details. To friends and family, they are impossible to ignore. At this stage, however, these doubts remain unspoken in any official capacity. No one storms a police station, no public accusations are made. There is shock, grief and confusion, but also an unspoken understanding of the environment. You gotta keep in mind, we are in 2012 Sri Lanka under Mahinda Rajapaksa's administration, where questioning an official narrative, especially one involving police conclusions, does not come naturally. The system does not encourage it. This time in Sri Lanka's politics was one of extreme oppression, and so people do not really speak against the state. Now, days later, another detail also surfaced. Wasim Thajudeen's wallet is found some distance away from the crash site, intact and unburnt, lying in the nearby brush. The discovery is logged, but again, it does not reopen the case. It does not trigger further inquiry. From an investigative standpoint, it could be explained away as having been thrown clear during impact. The explanation is convenient and no one pushes beyond it. By then, the file on his life is already closed. A single page report existed. The death has been categorized, processed, and shelved. What begins to change slowly and almost invisibly is not the police position, but the families. Online forums begin to buzz with speculation. Why were no witnesses mentioned? Why did the investigation conclude so hastily? These questions do not yet form an accusation. Officially, the story ends here. Unofficially, it has only just begun. Later, on May 17, 2012, Wasim Thajudeen's remains are transferred from the crash site to the Colombo Judicial Medical Officer's office for a post-mortem examination. The body is severely burned, which immediately complicates the process. Fire damage can obscure injuries, distort tissues, and erase external markers that pathologists rely on to reconstruct cause of death. This alone should have necessitated a cautious, layered approach, especially given the profile of the deceased. The autopsy was conducted by Professor Ananda Samarasekara, who at the time held the position of Colombo's Chief Judicial Medical Officer, one of the most senior forensic authorities in the country. His role carried institutional weight, and his conclusions will not merely inform this case, they will define it. The autopsy does not, at least initially, deliver a clear cause of death. This is a critical point that only becomes visible years later. According to material later presented in court and discussed by forensic experts, Professor Anand's early report does not conclusively state how Wasim died. It remained open-ended, pending further analysis. There is no definitive ruling that the death occurred due to burns or smoke inhalation, trauma, or a combination of factors. In a system functioning strictly by protocol, such ambiguity would keep the investigation alive. In many cases we have covered in Desi Crime, it's not a bad thing where an autopsy report says reason of death unknown. But instead, in this case where protocol isn't being followed, something else happens because of this ambiguity. Police statements to the media in 2012 begin implying conclusions that the autopsy does not make. Within days, the narrative circulating publicly is that traces of alcohol were found in Wasim Thajudeen's blood and that carbon monoxide inhalation contributed to his death. These claims appear in police briefings and news reports, creating the impression that the forensic findings support the accident theory. For friends and family, this again is deeply unsettling. Not only because Wasim was known to be a teetotaler, but because the family themselves have not been shown any toxicology report, nor have they been walked through the medical reasoning behind these statements. At this stage, no one formally challenges the police version for the same reason as the autocratic system they happen to have found themselves in. But a quiet distrust does take root. Inside the mortuary, interactions between the family and the forensic process raise further concerns. Dr. Aisha Thajudeen, Wasim's sister and herself a medical professional, later recalls behavior she found irregular and disturbing. On the very day of the autopsy, Professor Anand Samarasekara urges her to quickly produce Wasim's past medical records, particularly documentation of rugby-related injuries. He asks her to sign an affidavit detailing those injuries before the body is released. To Aisha, this feels wrong. Old sports injuries should be noted as part of the medical history, but should not be foregrounded in a manner that appears designed to preemptively explain fractures or trauma. Say they were to find some fracture in his body. It's easy to then write that off as an old rugby injury, when in fact it could have been the reason why he died. The urgency with which the head of the forensic department was asking her these things, the insistence and the framing struck her as inappropriate. Professor Samarasekara also orders x-rays of the body, which again should be standard procedure in cases involving suspected accidents. X-rays are meant to reveal fractures, internal damage, and injury patterns that may not be visible externally. However, according to Aisha, she's never shown the x-ray results. No explanation is offered, no discussion follows. In retrospect, this omission becomes deeply significant. If the x-rays showed fractures inconsistent with the vehicular accident, they would have undermined the emerging narrative. At the time, however, the family lacked both the information and the leverage to press for answers. As the days pass, the autopsy findings are not finalized. Professor Samarasekara later states that he was waiting for additional reports, including toxicology analysis, which he claims took as long as 9 months to be completed. Now, Ashwarya, for reference, we've covered cases such as the Philadelphia case with Nadia Malik, where toxicology played an important role. We did the Shashi Tharoor case, where the toxicology report of Sunanda Pushkar played a pivotal role. In those cases, the toxicology reports took a few months. But that was to find very rare poisons.
Yeah, you couldn't explain. In Nadia Malik, for example,
Exactly.
no one had any idea what happened.
Exactly. You are doing a toxicology report for alcohol. It is the first thing that comes up in a basic preliminary report. How can that toxicology report take 9 months?
This is just absurd to me. This is incompetence on so many levels. I'm also wondering, what does a system have to gain by not investigating a death the right way? Is it just overworked police inspectors who don't want something to deal with? Is there a political motive here at play? Why is it in the police's interest to not investigate something?
Some level of this could be explained by complacency, lethargy, underpaid officers. But the on-ground police, the forensic department, all of them working together.
But then it can be like a cycle where the police has said one thing and now that department doesn't want to cut the police, so they're working in tandem that way. So one complacent department is sort of turning the wheels of this and everything has followed suit. But what is making the police act in this way?
I think the hint lay in the first statement I made around this episode's familiarity with the case that India knows all too well, is the Sushant Singh Rajput case. While I don't think the cases are apples to oranges, I think the conspiratorial element is. And in this case, the conspiratorial element plays a huge role. And we'll find out. If you remember, we covered the Yvonne Johnson case, which is a Sri Lanka-based case. And it was only after a certain president went away that that case was properly investigated. The similar thing's going to happen here.
Crazy.
In 2014, the same forensics head published another interim report in which he said that still the cause of his death remains uncertain. Now, in any ordinary circumstance, such sustained uncertainty would demand renewed investigation. Instead, in this case, it exists in parallel with a police file that has already been closed, archived, and forgotten. For nearly 3 years, nothing moved. The file sat where it was left in 2012, thin, untouched, officially closed. But in January 2015, something outside the case changes, and that change reaches all the way into it. Mahinda Rajapaksa's government falls. The man who had dominated Sri Lankan politics through the end of the war is voted out. In his place comes Maithripala Sirisena, campaigning on a promise that had been missing for years: accountability. For Wasim Thajudeen's family, the shift felt unreal at first. They have learned not to hope. Every attempt to ask questions in the past had ended the same way: polite nods, quiet doors closing, phone calls never being returned. But this time, something was different. Something felt different. Opposition politicians began naming Wasim publicly, on stages, in speeches, in interviews. His death was no longer spoken about in whispers. It was framed as evidence, a symbol of what unchecked power looked like under the previous administration.
And if someone wants to see what unchecked power looks like under the administration of this new leader, go watch Yvonne Johnson, which is, I think, the cycle of abuse and the cycle of power and the cycle of politics is the nature of the game. It's the blame game. It's corrupt power because the system inherently is corrupt, and you can remove the politician and place a new one.
For those of you, Yvonne Johnson was one of the first cases we covered. It is this guy's administration that is responsible for suppressing that case. But in this case, the new administration is what allowed justice to come
hero,
through.
I suppose.
Yeah. But like you said, it's
all for the sake of their own gain
system.
and power. It has nothing to do with victims because
they don't care about Wasim.
Yeah,
Wasim's a pawn
don't care
in the
about
large
Yvonne
scheme
either.
of,
Yeah.
Whether for personal power or not, for the first time, Wasim's case is no longer untouchable. On May 17th, 2015, exactly 3 years after Wasim died, his family and supporters gathered publicly. There is a commemoration. There are placards. There are cameras. Under mounting public pressure, the authorities reopened the file. It is only at this point, 3 years after the incident, that Professor Samarasekara produces what he calls an addendum to his original post-mortem report. In this addendum, his opinion changes substantially. He now asserts that the carbon monoxide poisoning was a major cause of death, implying that Wasim Thajudeen was alive when the fire started and inhaled smoke. This conclusion effectively resurrects the accident theory at a moment where other evidence is beginning to point in the opposite direction. It's almost like he is trying to just close this case and ensure nobody else prods further. The timing and content of this addendum immediately drew criticism from within the forensic community. Dr. Ajit Tenakun, who by this point has become Colombo's chief judicial medical officer, later tells investigators and the court that the interim report and the final addendum contain totally different opinions. He states plainly that if Professor Samarasekara had given a consistent and honest opinion earlier, there would have been no need for a second autopsy or further forensic review. But the implication is clear. The first autopsy did not merely miss details, it actively obscured them. As investigators begin examining the medical record more closely, another contradiction emerges, this time between institutions. The government analyst report states that there is no carbon monoxide detected in Wasim Thajudeen's lungs. This directly contradicts the claim that smoke inhalation caused or contributed to death. Both statements cannot be true. Either Wasim was breathing during the fire or he was not. And if he was not, that means he was put in the car after being killed. This discrepancy is not a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of fact, and it points towards a chilling possibility. Wasim Thajudeen may have been murdered. By mid-2015, the credibility of the first autopsy was no longer being questioned. It was under formal scrutiny. The Sri Lanka Medical Council was opening an inquiry into Professor Samarasekara's conduct, focusing particularly on irregularities in reporting and the handling of forensic evidence. What initially appeared to be professional ambiguity now begins to resemble something far more serious. For the Thajudeen family, this period is emotionally devastating. They are forced to confront the possibility that the system entrusted with determining how their son and brother died may have failed him at the most fundamental level, not through a single dramatic act, but through a series of small, quiet decisions. What to emphasize, what to delay, what to leave unsaid. Each one defensible in isolation. Maybe it was complacency, but together it was catastrophic, and together it seemed like a conspiracy. By the time the case reached the Criminal Investigation Department later in 2015, the CID of Sri Lanka, the first autopsy is no longer a neutral document. It is a contested artifact, a record shaped by pressure, timing, and omission. And it sets the stage for what came next: the forensic unearthing of injuries that should have never been missed, and evidence that someone, somewhere, worked very hard to make disappear. The next decisive shift in the Thajudeen story unfolds in mid-2015, and the file is transferred from the city police to the CID, a unit with greater autonomy and forensic expertise. By 27th July 2015, CID investigators stand before the Colombo Additional Magistrates Court and deliver a jaw-dropping declaration. The death of Wasim Thajudeen was not a traffic accident. They present a catalogue of injuries that makes the crash narrative untenable. Smashed teeth, multiple fractured ribs, shattered pelvic bones, deep leg lacerations consistent with deliberate slashing, and a puncture wound to the neck from a sharp implement. None of these injuries conform to the physics of a late-night collision into a wall. They point instead to a prolonged violence inflicted while the victim was alive.
Aryan, those are mind-blowing injuries. That is so
That's
brutal and violent.
Yeah.
That's not something you can miss. It's not like one asphyxiation mark on your neck that you missed on the body because you
It's something
didn't
you
see.
hide. You don't miss it.
So my question is, did no one see his body? Was it that burnt that when the family saw it, the friends saw it, they couldn't make any of this out?
The body was, from the looks of it, it was completely burned, right? Only in an autopsy environment can you further investigate the fractures inside, the smashed teeth and all of that. That's something that the family and friends are not handling.
Right, but the lacerations in the legs.
The family, again, like, I don't know how much contact they were allowed.
Yeah.
But again, lacerations and all these things, the lacerations are an example of an accident. Like, one can view the lacerations as an accident, right? If the family even saw that.
Sure.
It's just that if forensic science is applied to analyze the lacerations, they were non-accidental lacerations. But that's something the family, from the looks of it, cannot tell. You need a forensic team to tell. But again, your question is right. Apart from the family, there are other people involved, whether at the lab or the police, who would have looked and known.
Seen something.
What would it require for somebody to obscure such the truth?
And so many social machineries failing at the same time.
And
For what reason is absurd to me.
within that allegation that you make of so many social machineries lies your answer. The person who controls all the machinery of the state. Now to Aishwarya's point, the evidence is clearly there on the body, then why didn't anybody else see it? So they wanted to see it, the investigators, in 2015. So that very same day, the magistrate ordered an exhumation, explicitly citing the need to conduct a more thorough medical examination under controlled conditions rather than relying on the first autopsy, which is by now completely disregarded. This moment, the CID's public repudiation of the accident theory, is the first time in 3 years that the official narrative begins to visibly crack. What follows is not merely a revision of cause of death, but the unraveling of an entire investigative history that was, in retrospect, rushed, hushed, superficial, and disturbingly silent on key facts. On 10th August 2015, under tight court supervision and police guard, the burial site at Dehiwala Muslim Cemetery is opened. The body of Wasim Thajudeen is exhumed, remarkably well preserved due to being sealed in plastic within the coffin. Leading the second post-mortem is Dr. Ajit Tenakun, the newly appointed Chief Judicial Medical Officer, accompanied by a panel of senior forensic specialists including Dr. Jean Pereira and SGA Huage. Over the next several days, the panel meticulously documented every remaining skeletal feature, soft tissue scar, and burn pattern. What they uncovered shattered whatever remained of the accident story. Several bones from the neck and chest are inexplicably missing, despite being crucial for determining whether there was strangulation or a crushing spinal injury. The injuries present, fractures to ribs in multiple places, a shattered pelvis inconsistent with airbag contact or steering wheel trauma, and sharp force wounds on the legs, are all unmistakably anti-mortem, meaning that they were inflicted before fire damage occurred. Importantly, the panel detects no significant evidence of carbon monoxide in the lungs, directly contradicting claims that the first autopsy suggested smoke inhalation as a cause of death. In procedural terms, the second autopsy adheres to modern forensic methodology, correlated x-rays, comparison of fracture patterns against known trauma profiles, and careful documentation under judicial oversight. The panel's report, submitted late in 2015, leaves no ambiguity. Wasim was beaten, tortured, and killed before his body was placed in the burning vehicle. The CID is no longer focused only on forensic inconsistencies. Attention shifts towards procedural anomalies that cannot be explained by incompetence alone. Phone records, long ignored, are finally reconstructed under court authority. What emerges is a pattern of communication in the early hours of 17th May 2012 that links Narayanpeta police not just to senior officers, but to numbers traced back to the presidential secretariat. These are not stray calls, not misdials, but repeated contacts clustered tightly around the window when Thajudeen's death is first reported. Investigators note that such calls would not ordinarily be routed through official channels for a routine traffic accident, especially one allegedly involving a lone driver and no third party. The implication is unmistakable. Someone with access to state power was monitoring and directing, possibly, the police response in real time. The significance of the missing bones cannot be overstated. In September 2016, CID homicide investigator Ravindra Vimalasiri tells the court that Professor Ananda Samarasekara, the original JMO who conducted the first postmortem, removed and retained multiple bone fragments and tissue samples after the initial autopsy. Rather than being held as official case productions, these materials were later found at the private SAITM medical campus in Malabe in the possession of Samarasekara after he joined the institution. Investigators treat this not as benign academic storage, but as concealment of state evidence, because such remains legally belong to the state once collected for a forensic inquiry.
Some of these South Asian cases, they just make me go like, what in the wild west? Like,
Wild West.
What the hell? Another case that made me feel this way was Padma and Lalli, where the autopsy is being conducted by the sweeper of the hospital and you're recording it on someone's wedding tape. Like, oh my God.
But I prefer complacency over conspiracy. Or do I? I actually
don't know. They're both just so systemically baffling. Like, where are people supposed to go if this is what is in place? What is someone supposed to do if this is what your autopsy doctor will do to you? Like,
I guess, I mean, anybody can be the victim of complacency, but you need to
the outcome is, to me, it's like, sure, from a how can we make this better standpoint, there are different things. But from a victim standpoint, when you're ending up with the same thing is a botched autopsy and no one finding out what happened to you because you had a botched autopsy, it's the same outcome. This is horrendous. This is a shit show.
I mean, the research for this episode, I was just skin crawling, annoyed all the time.
Yeah, that was me during Padma and Lalli. I was just like, what?
Yeah. Court records show that mortuary staff were later questioned and they corroborated that the removal of these body parts were done under instructions from senior levels, not by random error, not by complacency. The gravity of this revelation lies not merely in missing bones, but in what their absence suggests. Certain injuries, particularly those to the neck and throat, were deliberately obscured, preventing an independent pathologist from conclusively establishing whether Wasim was strangled or suffered fatal blows to the cervical spine. The disappearance of evidence becomes a central theme in the rewrite of the case's early chapters. Now, as forensic contradictions accumulate and the accident narrative collapses, the investigation changed from what happened to who done it. Phone records reveal that in the early hours of 17th May 2012, Narayanpeta police were in comms with the presidential secretariat. When these communications are mapped alongside movements of security-linked vehicles, a pattern begins to emerge. The police response that night appears coordinated and monitored and guided from above. Physical evidence soon reinforces what the phone data suggests. CCTV footage never requested in 2012 but recovered between 2016 and 17 shows Wasim leaving a Colombo supermarket shortly before midnight at 12:30 am, his car being followed by at least one other vehicle. Frame by frame, reconstruction places him in the parking lot at 12:28 am, contradicting the original claim that he simply lost control on an empty road. Investigators overlay this footage with mobile phone tower data, revealing the presence of multiple devices linked to security personnel moving in parallel with Thajudeen's route. Compounding this is the belated recovery of Thajudeen's own call records. Dialog Telecom, the data provider, had earlier informed police in 2015 that the data was irretrievable due to age. Yet under judicial pressure in 16 and 17, those same records are produced. Clearly conspiracy at play and power at play yet again, even in the private sector. This reveals patterns of communication with numbers associated with security officers, further exposing how critical digital evidence was either ignored or actively sidelined in the original investigation. The investigation takes a decisive turn when attention focuses on a specific vehicle repeatedly appearing in both CCTV footage and witness reconstructions. In September 2018, during open court proceedings, the CID revealed that a Land Rover Defender bearing registration WPKA0642 was involved in trailing and pursuing Thajudeen's car on the night of 17th May. The vehicle was registered to Cyrilia Savia Foundation, a charity, and this to me is mind-blowing. This charity was headed by then First Lady Shiranthi Rajapaksa. This is huge. Investigators are careful to clarify that by identifying the vehicle, it does not establish who was driving it or under whose instruction it was deployed. But the implication is unavoidable. An asset directly associated with the Rajapaksa's family's inner circle was present at the heart of events that night. Somebody related to the president of the country was there at the murder of a 27-year-old rugby player. The case can no longer be framed as isolated police misconduct. That would be convenient, but untrue. It now points squarely towards state-level interference. Within this context, the CID begins to confront the political ceiling surrounding the case. Thajudeen was not a political actor, but he was socially adjacent to power, moving within elite rugby circles that included members of the Rajapaksa family. Investigators identify call activity and logistical overlaps involving individuals close to those circles in the hours surrounding the death, though no direct orders are documented. Internally, CID officers acknowledge that probing beyond the security apparatus risks institutional pushback. The strategy shifts accordingly. If the murder itself yet cannot be prosecuted, the suppression of truth can be. This recalibration leads to the first major legal actions in this case. I personally find this very interesting, Ash. Recently, I was reading about what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and it's a case I'm going to cover about sort of the India's role in Ukraine and Russia that's been happening. But in sort of researching that, there has been a major corruption scandal in Ukraine in the last 2 months. Even when I was there in Kiev, everybody was talking about this as something Zelensky needs to look out for. Now, the state apparatus that was probing the tax department that was probing the corruption, it's called the anti-corruption unit, could have either gone for the top ministers that were leading the corruption or the folks aiding them that were outside the system.
Yeah.
That while that strategy feels like, come on, you got to target the actual ministers.
But one is actually doable.
That might help you get to the other one.
Correct.
But to the public, it is a reframing that requires a lot of convincing, because it does not, that sense of justice that we vie for isn't there.
It doesn't exist.
When I was reading this, that same sort of principle applies here, and I find it interesting what the police is doing.
Right.
Where they are now, as you will see, go after those in the bureaucracy, the officers and all, that suppress the truth, the forensic guy that suppressed the truth, and hopefully that leads them to the people that orchestrated it.
I understand completely the frustration with the tactic like that. It's the lowest hanging fruit is to take the petty constable who, whatever, did not report it right, and the one autopsy examiner who didn't do the right job. It's the lowest hanging fruit. I think the only way I can rationalize it in my head is that doing this at least maybe in the future will prevent these people
Sure. Yeah, it's
from,
preventative also. Yeah.
so whoever the next person is in the position of the examiner, whoever the next inspector is that replaces this one, maybe they will know
There
that you
will be
could be,
consequences.
you could be related to and helping out the current president, but the president changes and power shift hands, and cases sometimes return to haunt you. So I think that's the only way that I can make sense of it.
So, on 20th April 2016, the CID arrested Sumit Pereira, the officer in charge of crimes at the Narayanpeta police station back in 2012. He's charged with fabricating records, withholding evidence, and deliberately steering the original investigation toward a false accident narrative. The arrest is unprecedented. A serving police officer accused of actively misdirecting an inquiry into the death of a national sports figure. Barely a month later, on 23rd May 2016, the CID arrested Senior Deputy Inspector General Anura, who had been Colombo's senior DIG at the time of Thajudeen's death. Officer Anura was one of the most powerful figures in Sri Lanka's police hierarchy and was charged with conspiracy to suppress evidence and participating in efforts to mislead the investigation from its inception. Court proceedings revealed that he maintained contact with officers on duty on the night in question and intervened to shut down investigative leads, including the retrieval of CCTV footage. As hearings unfolded, the evidence presented painted a consistent picture. Calls from Presidential Secretariat to Narayanpeta Police, the presence of the Shirlia defender near Park Road, and the communication between the Presidential Security Division personnel and local police are all documented and submitted. And on 28th February 2019, the Attorney General's Department formalizes these findings by indicting him, Sumit Pereira, and former Chief Judicial Medical Officer Professor Anand Samara Sekra. The charges include conspiracy to conceal evidence, causing the disappearance of material exhibits, and perverting the course of justice. Yet, the limitations of accountability are stark. No one is indicted for the act of killing Wasim Thajudeen. No member of the Presidential Security Division is charged. No political figure from the Rajapaksa inner circle is named as a conspirator. Prosecutors acknowledge in court that certain investigative lines remain ongoing, a careful phrasing that reflects both evidentiary challenges and political sensitivity. Justice, while advancing, stops short of the apex. The years that follow are marked by attrition. Professor Samara Sekra dies in 2020 before proceedings against him conclude, permanently foreclosing judicial determination of his alleged role in evidence destruction. In 2021, Officer Anura dies while on bail, ensuring that the most senior police officer implicated in the cover-up never faced a final verdict. These deaths are formally recorded and widely noted as critical blows to prosecutorial momentum. Sumit Pereira remains the sole surviving accused, but with co-defendants deceased and years elapsed, the trial proceeds slowly, intermittently, and without resolution. Then, in late 2025, the investigation resurfaces with a development that alters its trajectory once again. Re-examining the 2012 CCTV footage using modern enhancement techniques, CID analysts identify a man seen following Thajudeen's vehicle as Aruna Vidanagamage, a man also known as Midenia Kaja, a notorious underworld figure. Kaja, who was killed in a gangland shooting in February 2025, is identified by his widow when shown still images by investigators. She points to his distinctive posture, shaped by a chronic hip injury, and corroborates accounts that he had spoken openly about possessing knowledge of the Thajudeen murder before his death. CID records statements from Kaja's relatives and associates in an effort to reconstruct his movements and affiliations in 2012. For the first time, a previously faceless pursuer is named, anchoring the abduction theory to a specific individual tied to organized crime. Despite this breakthrough, the case remains unsolved by the end of 2025 and now in the beginning of 2026. Police state publicly that fresh leads are being pursued and that further questioning of figures connected to security forces is underway. But no new indictments are filed against living suspects directly tied to the killing of Wasim himself. Now to address the elephant in the room, the question that has been on all of your minds. We get the who-done-it bit. But why? What's the why-done-it bit? What is the motive? By 2019, investigators were no longer trying to reconstruct the mechanics of Wasim Thajudeen's death. That was already clear. The remaining question was why a young rugby player with no political role, no public platform, and no known criminal ties triggered a response that reached the highest levels of the state. The CID's answer lay not in ideology or money, but in proximity. Thajudeen moved within the Colombo's elite rugby and social circles, spaces that overlap, like I said, directly with the Rajapaksa family's inner world. According to witness statements recorded during the re-investigation, a personal dispute had developed between Thajudeen and Yoshita Rajapaksa, a naval officer and son of then President Mahinda Rajapaksa. Multiple witnesses described confrontations rooted in an alleged romantic relationship involving a woman socially linked to Yoshita. CID officers told court that these accounts were consistent across independent statements and described rising tension, verbal threats, and pressure placed on Thajudeen in the weeks leading up to his death. What elevated these statements beyond rumor was corroboration. Call detail records placed Thajudeen's phone within the Carlton House phone network, a closed and secure system reserved for the Rajapaksa family and the Presidential Security Division. This was not a public exchange or a casual overlap. It established direct, traceable proximity between Thajudeen and the presidential security infrastructure shortly before his death. Investigators did not claim this proved intent, but they concluded it explained response. In the context of Sri Lanka in 2012, a personal dispute involving the president's son was not treated as a private matter. It was treated as a threat to reputation, to hierarchy, and to control. From the CID's perspective, the motive was not impulsive violence or jealousy alone. It was the perceived need to ensure permanence, to ensure that whatever Thajudeen knew, represented, or might say would never reach daylight. The machinery that followed, silence, speed, coordination, flowed from that calculation, however rational it was. For Thajudeen's family and for a public that has watched the case unfold and unravel over more than a decade now, the record bears little resemblance to the story first presented in 2012. The accident narrative was not merely weakened, it has collapsed under the weight of forensic contradictions, altered records, missing evidence, and belated discoveries that consistently point away from chance and toward intent. What remains unsolved is no longer the manner of death, but the motive that set this machinery in motion. Why was a young rugby player pursued through Colombo after midnight, followed by security-linked vehicles, and ultimately silenced in a way that demanded immediate institutional intervention? Why did police, forensic officials, and senior officers act with such urgency to close the case if there was nothing to protect? The story, the truth, may only be told in the annals of history. Until then, stay safe, stay crazy, and stay desi.
If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.